Hello and welcome to this webinar titled The Top 10 Power User Features to Automate Your Network with Gluware. This is the first webinar of 2021, so welcome to the new year. Hopefully it's off to a better start than 2020 was for you. We're already here at the end of March, so it is beginning to fly by. So while the top 10 list is subjective, I've selected features to highlight that are either new in 4.0 or some of the minor releases we've put out, including 4.0.1, 4.0.2 releases since, as well as some lesser known features so I can highlight and educate you on. So for today's session, I am the lone presenter. This is Michael Howe, VP of Product Marketing at Gluware. I've been with Gluware about 5 years now and been helping customers to automate their enterprise networks. I have lived the pain. I started out in network operations at IBM and acted as a network engineer and network designer. So I have rolled out networks and done a lot of time on CLI, a lot of time doing manual configurations and manual troubleshooting and trying to take paper standards and go hop by hop in a network trying to get it all working for large enterprise customers. And now it's an honor and a pleasure to share with you a better way to automate and a better way to live, essentially, when you are tasked with keeping the lights on and keeping the network running and enabling new features in the network. So let's move on to the features. So here's today's agenda. We're going to go through these top 10 features, and you might be happy to know that this is the last slide of the presentation. After this, we'll jump into all UI-based demonstrations. So for the top 10 power user features we're going to be highlighting today, first is going to be dashboards. Dashboard framework is very powerful and really a different way to use the product to leverage insight as to what's going on and use it to navigate. So I want to make sure you know how to use the Gluware dashboards as a power user. Second feature, we'll be highlighting network discovery. Network discovery is really important if you have a lot of change in your network, a lot of devices being added. Maybe you're going through acquisition, and be able to leverage and use network discovery to discover those devices and add them into the Gluware platform. Next is the Ad-Hoc Query Tool, and I really wish I had this when I was a network engineer. This ability to define queries to query the configuration state or the operational state, and it's available in Device Explorer, which is in several applications in Gluware. We'll highlight that. Number 4 is Syslog notification triggering. So you might know we introduced integration with Syslog. Now we can enable Syslog to trigger events. In this case, we're going to show you how to trigger a config drift to see what a user might have changed in a configuration. So 5, 6, and 7 are all related. 5 is really extending the Gluware database by adding custom fields to devices so you can store additional data about those devices in the system. 6 is, I'm actually going to flip the order of 6 and 7. We're going to look at using custom fields with config modeling, so leveraging those variables to then automate the features. And then we'll come back to what's labeled as 6 here. We'll show you how to audit for specific variables that are supposed to be in a configuration. So 5, 6, and 7 are all related to leveraging custom fields across automation and drift. Number 8 is a feature, one of my favorites, that is kind of hidden inside config modeling, and that's state assessment. Being able to define operational commands and then perform a query on those. And we're going to show you some power user tips and tricks to be more efficient in sharing and editing those state assessments. Number 9 is around multi-edit, just making you work a little more productive and a little more quickly when you're editing fields within Device Manager and config modeling. Again, a little bit of a hidden feature. Want to make sure you're doing it, not manually editing each device in Device Manager or config modeling. And number 10, a power user feature, using Gluware to leverage the read capability of Gluware to identify a variable that's configured on the device, or discover a field and assign it to a variable and then leverage that variable for configuration management. So we will fill the hour with demonstrations of these features, and I hope you get a lot out of it. And if there's additional things you'd like to see, please let us know. You can contact me directly or sales@gluware.com, and we will look to add or extend the content. So with that, if there is anything you want to brush up on, if you're a little bit light on your Gluware skill set, you can visit gluware.com and check out our tutorials page for tutorials on pretty much all of these topics. And you can also request a test drive to kick the tires yourself. So let's move on to the demonstrations. Okay, so let's jump into the Gluware user interface here, and we're going to jump into the first feature, which is dashboards. So one quick thing I want to point out to you is that when you're signing into Gluware, in the lower right hand corner you're going to see a version number, and that is the release of Gluware that you have installed and running. So we're running here version 4.0.2. So since 4.0 we've had 2 minor releases. We in fact have a 3rd minor release coming out that here at the end of March, and then we'll have the 4.1 release targeted for the May timeline. In parentheses, you actually see that the date of which the system was last updated. So this system was updated on March 25th. So let's go ahead and get signed into the portal. One other thing I want to highlight for you is that I'm going to navigate into system settings. And again, just based on information around like what version you're running, if you navigate to the global view, you're going to see a lot of details about Gluware. So if you're, again, trying to understand what server you're on, what install, when it was updated, and the various underlying modules, you can understand that here. So I'm running 4.0.2, as I mentioned, and that was my install date. So that information is also available here. Another very key and critical component of Gluware in ensuring that you are up to date is to navigate into Solution Management. And in Solution Management, you're going to see all the packages of Gluware and if there are newer packages available. So with config modeling and the vendor adapter kits and device discovery and numerous others, I can see here that I do have actually numerous packages here that have been updated. So as mentioned, we're here at the end of March, and Gluware 4.0.3 is coming out, and I have those packages available to me, and so they're already here. I could go ahead and install each one of these. So when you're wondering if you don't see some things you see in my version that you are wondering why it's not, first of all, I'm using 4.0.2, as well as I may have a more updated package for things than you. Gluware is a very modular system. So with that, let's get into dashboards. I'm going to navigate into my dashboards. And one of the first things I want to point out to you is that Gluware dashboards were new in 4.0, and with 4.0, Gluware preceded 4 dashboards for examples that should be in your library. So you're going to see the My Inventory, OS Management, Audit, and Drift Alerts, and Welcome to Gluware. These will all be created by an admin user on your system, and these are there for example, and they're very useful and maybe a baseline to build off of. But a couple things I want to highlight. Anytime there are dashboards that have been created, and I'll click into one of these. I'll click into the Welcome to Gluware one for an example. Anytime an admin or another user has created a dashboard, you cannot edit that dashboard. You can only edit the dashboards that you have created. So that's one thing to highlight. So let me navigate back into the library. The thing you can do, let's say you liked Welcome to Gluware, but you wanted to make it your own, you can click on the settings and clone it. So if I want to clone this dashboard, I can say, Mike, welcome. Okay, so I can say Mike, welcome dashboard, and hit save. And now I have a new dashboard in addition here called the Mike Welcome dashboard. I can see it was created by me. So now I can go in and I can configure. So now let's say, like for example, in my system here the RSS feed is not loading. So let's say I don't want that in my dashboard anymore. I can just delete it out. And now that one is not there anymore. And let's say I like the Fortinet security threat view, but I want to move it. I can just drag it over here, and then hopefully you've watched the original tutorial on dashboards, but the dashboards are it's a kind of a widget-based framework. So I can bring up the add widget, and I can see all the widgets that are here and available. And I do want to point out to you that Gluware is going to continue to add to the library of widgets. In fact, in the release 3 coming out here, it is actually just releasing. So we'll get some tutorial information out about that soon. But there are a couple new widgets available in release 3, and then Gluware 4.1 will also have new widgets. So if I want to, add anything in, let's say I want to add a count widget, I can add it here, and then I'm going to close that menu, and I want a count of my devices and just a very basic count, and hit save, and I can see in my system I have 23 devices. So in this little example here, I wanted to show you where I took a pre-seeded dashboard created by Gluware and seeded in the system. I've now made it my own and I've edited it. The other thing you can see this dashboard here has dated information. I can hit configure. This is basically a text widget. So what I can say is, on the 25th of March of 2021, system updated 4.0.2. And hit space here. And this is, you can hyperlink things here. You can make it whatever you want to be. And I hit save. And if I were to make this a public dashboard, which is something I'll touch on in a minute, any other users that come in are going to see that. So let's say one of my roles was updating Gluware and making sure that the user base had it, the most recent version. I could come in here and edit this information so everyone understands when it was updated. So if I'm happy with this, I can hit publish, and now that dashboard is published and saved. Okay, so now it's added to my library. One other key point to highlight here is that you'll have your whole list of dashboards, and you can change the way in which you see it. You can, let me see here, you can filter. So coming up and hitting the icon on the top right, if you end up with a lot of dashboards, you can search by dashboard name, you can search by tags, you can search by permissions and shared. You have a lot of these filter views set up here, but I don't need that. But one of the things I do want to highlight is that we have this notion of favorite dashboards. So let's take my new Mike Welcome dashboard and add it to favorites. And I'm going to add my inventory to favorites, add to favorites. And I'm going to add OS management, add, and I'm going to add the audit and, back to my dashboard. I'm going to add audit and drift. So add to favorites. So the reason you would want to add to favorites is that when you're viewing dashboards, oftentimes you want to kind of rotate through the dashboards and look at the information, from different perspectives. So welcome, an inventory, OS management, a drift. So now I have these published in my favorites. Now what I want to do is come into my own profile. So I click on my user icon there and I say edit profile. And within your profile, you can control the theme, light and dark. So what we'll do is, just to show you, we'll switch it into dark mode. And then we have these enable shortcuts. So the shortcuts allow you with keystrokes like Alt and arrow or Alt and number to rotate through your dashboards kind of very quickly instead of, let's say, manually clicking. I find this very helpful, the Alt arrow keys. So as soon as I hit save, the browser will refresh so that it understands and picks up that dark mode setting on the dashboard. So I'm going to navigate back into my dashboards. And now you can see we're in dark mode. And now also I'm going to navigate in and bring up this dashboard. So now I'm viewing the welcome to my Mike's welcome dashboard. And now I can hit Alt arrow. You got to make sure you're kind of on the dashboard from a navigation perspective. I hit Alt arrow and I can quickly navigate through my favorite dashboards. So this kind of quick navigation will only work on the dashboards that are in your favorites. It's not going to navigate through every dashboard in your library. So one of the next things I want to highlight for you is that every widget here is filtering information or presenting information to you about the underlying data. So let's say I want to see, and let me switch to, again, if the Alt arrow, make sure you click on the dashboard. So here in the Audit and Drift Alert dashboard, I wanted to highlight for you that the widgets are clickable. So what that means is if I view this widget here where I see unchanged, errored, and changed, and I want to know, well, what device has changed, I can highlight that component of the widget and click on it. Gluware will navigate me into the Device Explorer inside of Drift and Audit and highlight for me the device that change has occurred on. I can double click on this device and see exactly what has changed, and someone has added an NTP server. So just highlighting the fact that the dashboards are clickable and they help you navigate in. So we're gonna take one more look, one more example of that. Let's Alt and arrow over to my inventory. And let's say I want to see all devices with this operating system, 16.12.1a, and there's 6 devices. I highlight on this widget and I click on it, and it's going to navigate me into Device Manager, and it's going to show me the devices that meet that criteria. So what the widget is doing is configuring the filter. So if I click the drop down here, I can see it's adding the filter of OS version equals 16.12.1a. So this is important to realize, is that you have the ability to click in and navigate like I've shown you, but anything you can do in the grid, you can also filter and define that information in the widget. So it really works both ways. The widget will navigate you in, and I can delete this filter and hit apply, and now the filter's gone. I see all my devices. But really anything you can filter here, you can also filter in your widget. So if I go back to my dashboards, actually, I'll go into my dashboard, which is fine. And let's say let's go back to my dashboard library, and let's just create a new dashboard because I want to highlight a little bit more of the filtering. And let's just call it test and test. Next. This is about the image it uses. You can customize the image. Next, and this is where you set it to public or private, and you can change parameters, but I'll make this private. Keep in mind that the dashboards or the Gluware system is hierarchical, and so you have the notion of organizations and children orgs, and so if any organization is created a child to my primary org, the dashboard I create will be visible if I tick this box. In 4.1, dashboards also become importable and exportable, which we've been asked for and has been on the roadmap. We intended it to be in the first release, but it will be coming in 4.1, where you can import and export dashboards as well for sharing. So let's just leave this one as private, hit next. What I want to highlight for you here is let's drag and drop the device grid in. And if you look at the device grid, you have the type, the name, IP address, and vendor. Well, let's say I want more information. You go into Configure, and you can set filters and ordering. So let's set a filter. Sorry, actually that's not what I want to do. Reset. I want to select and reorder the columns. So in my use case here, let's say with my devices, I want to see the uptime, which at least for most operating systems we can expose that from discovery. So let me find uptime and drag it into here, because I want an indicator as to how long the device has been up and running for. So I hit apply and I hit save. So now I've just edited that, and now I can sort from like lowest to highest. So if I go from lowest to highest, if any of these devices had reset, I would highlight it. Now there are a couple vendors that we don't pull the uptime stat for, you see here. But as soon as we get into all these vendors, we do see all the uptime stat being populated. And if I was trying to get an indicator if a device reset, its uptime would be, again, back to 0 or very low number, and I could highlight that. So just want to highlight for you that really almost anything you drag and drop in, you just hit the icon and you say configure, and you can go and edit the details, including filtering and sorting and other useful information to present the data as you need. So with that, that completes the demonstration on dashboards. Again, just to finalize this one, if I was happy with this dashboard, I can just hit publish it, and then it's available in my library. If I want to get rid of what I just did, I can just hit cancel, and I exit out, and I'm back to my dashboard library. So with that, this continues the dashboard example, and we'll move on to the next. Okay, so let's keep it moving and move right into network discovery. To access network discovery, we're going to use the app selector and navigate into Device Manager. Here in Device Manager, you're going to see the devices that have already been added into Gluware. And to execute a network discovery, you're going to access it from the action bar. There's an icon for network discovery, and you click on that icon, and you're going to see the network discovery page here to initiate a network discovery. So the basics of network discovery is you seed Gluware with a device, you seed it with the credentials. We're going to use SSH and the default port of SSH. You can customize it. And then we're going to access that device, and we're going to perform a search method leveraging the ARP table, Cisco Discovery Protocol, and Link Layer Discovery Protocol. So essentially, we're interrogating that device. We're looking at the IPs in those tables of that device, and then we're going to interrogate each one of those IPs. So Discovery has been in for a few releases, but there's a few new features. So let's take a look at some of this in action. I'm going to click on my Spoke 1 device here, and I'm going to say use selected device. So what it's going to do there is essentially use my Spoke 1 as my seeded device, and I'm going to make sure I have the proper permission password in here. One of the new features you're going to see is the IP exclusion. So you can specify IP subnets to exclude. This is important if your network connects to a partner network or an external network, and you want to not have Gluware interrogate those devices. So whatever you put here in your exclusion list, Gluware is not going to interrogate. So that's important. This is use initial as proxy, or initial IP as proxy, means Gluware is going to sign into that device and then hop from that device to the network devices. So if you have an issue where the Gluware controller does not have direct IP connectivity to those devices, or you're worried about a proxy or something, if the proxy is not configured, you can use this device and Gluware will hop through that device to get to it. Clear existing results has been added as well. When Gluware has already run a search, it is caching a previous result, and therefore you won't see it will keep those results and will save them. So if a device was inaccessible or a device was already known, it will have cached that. By selecting clear, you're going to start kind of from scratch, right? So once you have those basic things set up, you can execute a run. And I can tell you right now that in my environment, Hub 1, Hub 2, Spoke 1 through Spoke 4 are networked together. And my other devices in this lab are not networked together. So in the log, we're going to see an entry that this is kicking off. And what I suggest you do is switch over to the real-time view of the results, and you're going to see the information populating. So let me clear this. What you're going to see here is Gluware has interrogated this initial device, and it's pulled the ARP table. Now it's interrogating each one of those IPs, and it's going to determine, are they duplicates, so if we can access devices from more than one way, it would be a duplicate entry. So Gluware has interrogated all those devices, and I can see that it's highlighted these other spokes in Hub 1. These are all networked together as known, and there's one device that is not, there is an error. So anytime a Gluware cannot log into a device, you're going to present it with an error, and then you can float over and expose the log, or you can float into it. I know that this particular device is a Linux box in my environment, and it is not using the same credentials. So Gluware is not able to log into that. So it's an authorization fail. What I could do is add this to the exclusion list if if I knew that there were devices or subnets not accessible. I could add it to the exclusion list. So therefore, the network discovery has run, and these are all known devices. If there were unknown devices, I could add them or import them into my selection. So that's a kind of a quick demonstration of defining and running a network discovery and a highlight of some of those new features, which again I can navigate back to this to highlight the exclusions and the clear search results. And there are additional features coming over the next 2 releases to Discovery, so stay tuned. And with that, we'll move on to the next demo. Okay, we're going to keep it moving here and jump into the next advanced feature, which is around Ad-Hoc Query. So Ad-Hoc Query is available from the Device Explorer, so I'm going to go ahead and close this out. And one thing about Device Explorer you're going to find is that the Device Explorer is a common component to multiple applications. So you see it in Device Manager, you see it in Drift and Audit, you see it in OS Manager. So it really is a kind of fundamental component of Gluware in terms of looking at your devices. And then we kind of change the personality of Device Explorer to match the application you're in. So not only do the default columns change when you're looking at it in different apps, but the action items can change as well. One feature we chose to make it consistent or available in Device Explorer no matter what app you view it in is a function called Ad-Hoc Query. And Ad-Hoc Query gives the ability to search configuration or search operational state on devices in your inventory. So you do need to select one or more devices to select it. So I'm going to go ahead and choose these devices, hub 1 through spoke 4, and I'm going to float over and just highlight that this is the Ad-Hoc Query option. Click on it, and you're going to see the dialog for the Ad-Hoc Query come up right here, and I can either perform a new query or access saved queries. Then I can either search configuration information being in the default snapshot, which is like you're saying should be my known good configuration saved in the Drift and Audit app, the latest snapshot, which is the latest configuration pulled, or search off the device themselves. So one important thing to note is if that you're searching off the default snapshot or latest snapshot, we're going to use the entries that have been saved in the database. We don't have to go and query anything. When we run it off the device, we are going to in real time go and query the devices. So you can query device config state or you can query device operational state. But if you're querying operational state, it's more important, or it's essentially kind of required to go query the device. From a config state, you can use what is already pulled into the database. So with that, let's jump into a couple examples. Let's say I'm troubleshooting a routing problem and I want to understand how BGP is configured and its operational state. Instead of having to go box by box, maybe traditionally you might do that manually, I'm going to show you an example here with BGP configured as a saved config. I'm searching the default snapshot and I'm searching for the string router BGP, which in Cisco iOS is used to configure it. And I can either edit the targets or I can just use the target devices that I already have in my list, which I'm happy with, and I click Run Query. And you're going to see the query runs very fast because those configurations are already stored in the Gluware database. And I can see that the spokes, and I know this because I configured this environment, my spokes are actually a full mesh of BGP, and my hubs are not configured for BGP in this example. So this is as expected that I have a BGP peer or I have router BGP configured and I don't have it configured in the hubs, and I can click in and navigate in to see router BGP is configured, and this is spoke 4, so it's AS400, and if I can navigate to spoke 1, I have 1 out of 1, it's router BGP 100. So again, it just gives you that kind of force multiplier to go and run the commands or search your configurations and then show you exactly how they're configured, and this is downloadable. So if I jump back to details, so now I know spokes 1 through 4 are configured for BGP. Now I want to look at the operational state. Let's navigate down to another saved search, which is the Bgp Neighbor State. So now I'm going to search the devices, meaning the engine is going to go down and run these commands on the device. I'm going to run by show command, and I'm executing the command show IP BGP neighbors, and I'm querying. This is a regex-based query. BGP state equals established. You got to make sure you get your case sensitive right or construct your regex accurately. And I'm going to go ahead and run the query again. This time again, you're going to see the dots move. And this is a signal that Gluware is doing a so-called provisioning. In this case, it's executing automation to run those read statements, the show statements. And I can see again, as expected, these two are not configured. So those are zeros and these are threes because each one is a neighbor of the other three spokes. They're in a full mesh. So if I navigate into one, I can see there are 3 matches. BGP state equal established, and I could step through them, each of the 3 matches in there, and same again, you can navigate into each one, and I can see BGP state, neighbor.2, neighbor.3, neighbor.4, and therefore, I can really speed up my troubleshooting. So jump back to details. One additional powerful component you may or may not know is that on the commands, you can actually use a comma and run multiple commands. So I chose an example here called device health. I'm gonna search the device. I'm gonna do show command. I'm actually gonna run more than one command. So I'm gonna run show proc CPU to check the CPU, and show procedure or process memory to look at the memory stat. And this is something you might have to do when troubleshooting a degradation or an issue trying to troubleshoot a device. And you do have to include a query. You can include anything that might match, or you can include a generic regex match all. So I just chose the very first line of the output of show proc CPU, which is CPU utilization. So I'm going to go ahead and run the query and just show you again. It's going to hit the devices, run those, and then whatever commands you specified, they're going to run. And you're going to be able to go and log and look into each of them. You can only specify one query though, but let's go and navigate in. Again, I pulled my CPU so I can see I'm at a low CPU utilization, and I do get my match here based on my query. Then I can scroll down on this, and again, it just saves me from having to do this on every single router manually. It's already captured all of this out, and here's the output of my show proc memory, and I can see the results here. So again, ad hoc query is super useful. It is basically built in for those troubleshooting or spot checking type use cases. If you want to use these type of show commands as more of a pre-check and a post-check for provisioning, that's going to fall into state assessment, which is another item we're going to cover in this session. But for now, this concludes the use case number 3 of ad hoc query. Okay, so let's move on to the next use case here of using Syslog to trigger config drift. And this is building off of Gluware 4.0. We introduced support for Syslog Listener to capture when a Syslog event happens of type 5, when a user is logging in to make a config change. We now have the ability to use that message to trigger a snapshot of the configuration. So to use config drift and audit, determine what has changed in the configuration. So let's take a look how we set that up. Let's jump into system settings. In system settings, under your organization top view, you're going to see a new option here called events. So what used to be called Syslog is now called events. Here you have what was released in 4.0, which is enabling Syslog in the system. So we're actively, essentially listening for Syslog messages on port 32,000 of a UDP. So that's the default. And then the default here is 6 minute to ignore duplicate messages of the same type. I knocked that down to 0 because I'm kind of testing it right now and showing you. So I want to see all the messages coming in. This dialog is new. This is the triggered message kind of dialog, what can trigger a snapshot. So I want to enable automatic configuration snapshots. And the one we're focused on right now is capturing a snapshot when there is a configuration change. So you want to enable that box and tick the box here. You just come in here and tick that box and hit save. That's all you have to do to set up Gluware to be a syslog listener and be able to trigger on syslog. So let's take a look at the next part of it. It's a little bit out of scope, but I want to ensure you know that Gluware can be used to configure the devices for syslog. And so you either need to have Gluware or the devices talking to Gluware directly via syslog, or you can have your devices talking to a syslog listener like Splunk or some other product and have it be a forwarder. But as long as the messages are being sent to Gluware, we are listening for those messages of type 5. And I'll just show you that we've automated syslog on this specific device I'm going to use in this example, the CSR number 152. And I am pointing it to log to a host of 10, 255, 150, 100. You can see that is this same system, and transport UDP port 32,000. So that matches. So syslog has been configured on this device, and we are a syslog listener. So now let's jump over to config drift and audit. Okay, here in the config drift and audit view, I'm going to navigate to the device view here, and I'm going to look at my devices here, and I can see that there is a flag or a drift here. So let me see if I can reset this, and this is actually showing one from a previous test. And what I do want to highlight for you is that you're going to want to turn on the columns for configured info, configured type, configured by, and configured on. And those are available in your settings for your Device Explorer. You want to come in and turn those on. Okay? So this gives you that ability. And this is a previous example. We'll run one live here, but I can see a syslog message came in. The user was admin, and this is on this date, and it did cause a drift. If I double click into that, drift and audit shows me exactly what changed. In this case, an NTP server was changed. So let me go ahead and select this device and do a new capture and hit start. And I just want to ensure that and see if I want to put it, kind of reset it into a known kind of good state, and then we will proceed on to cause another triggered syslog event here. So that's here. I'm going to go ahead and flag this guy and say, okay, the configuration is good. And so now I'm in a state where there's no drift detected. Okay, so now we want to trigger drift. So to trigger drift, I want to bring up another window, and I'm just going to bring this over here, and I'm going to emulate an unauthorized change. So this is the same system, 10, 255, 150, 100, and I'm accessing the terminal. You may know, but if you don't know, you can select a node in the Gluware config modeling view, and you can bring up the terminal window, and I've logged into that device. So I am on the command line of this device. And now what I want to do is make a couple configuration changes to trigger the syslog. So I'm going to come in here. I'm going to go into config T. Just going into config T and exiting will trigger the drift, but I want to actually highlight, I'm going to add a name server of 8.8.8.8. And I'm going to, I believe this NTP server was added. I'm going to remove no NTP server 2.2.2.2. Okay, so I'm going to add something and remove something and type exit to get out. And then let's jump back over here. And we're going to see here that by making that change, the syslog message came in, and I logged in as user Cisco, and we have now triggered a drift. And so you can see it's processing, and I can double click on it, and you see here that this was added, 8.8.8.8 was added, and this command was removed. So what I'm basically showing you here is a Syslog integration. Now not only do you get notified, and I can see the timestamp here with this syslog message that came in, the user type Cisco, and this is the date and time at which I'm recording this. And sure enough, drift was detected. So now I could go into config modeling and remediate. I could go and do a reprovisioning and bring that back. But the highlight of this use case is showing the fact that Syslog, Gluware is catching the Syslog message. That Syslog message is triggering a drift, and I have a visual notification. I also could have an email notification and understand that something changed. So this is more of a closed loop in the sense that we're actively monitoring the network to be notified of change. So with that, this concludes that use case, and we'll move on to the next. So now we're going to run into the next couple of use cases that are going to be, I'm going to execute consecutively. We're going to look at custom fields and how you see and use them in Device Manager. Then we're going to look at using those custom fields in config modeling, so using the variables to apply automation, and then how we can also use those custom fields in config audit. So let's move on here. To configure custom fields, you want to navigate into the system settings and into your organization, and you are going to see the option here for custom fields. Now, what I've added here, usually you're not going to have anything in here by default. I've clicked on Add Custom Field, and I've enabled the field. I name the field. In this case, I'm going to use these as variables for SNMP, for management configuration. So I've created a field name region, a field name country, and then I've specified a data type of dropdown, and then I've specified a dropdown of 3 different regions: America region, APAC region, EMEA region, and that the default is the America region, and this is a geographic region, and it's groupable. Okay, so I've created that one, and then I've created a second one called country. It's also a dropdown. If I double click in here, USA, Czech Republic, Germany, Ireland, Italy, Japan, right? So totally customizable. Basically, you're taking the Gluware database and you're extending it, and you're adding fields that you can then capture and assign for the devices in your inventory. So I'm going to use these 2 custom fields, and we get this a lot because you're going to say, oh, Gluware automation is great, but where do you get your variables, or where do you store your variables, and where's the source of truth? And Gluware essentially is a source of truth, or becomes a source of truth. It can take information from other sources. So you can configure that information directly in Gluware. You can import it via CSV, and you can actually even populate or push it via API. So I've defined these fields, and I've saved them in system settings. So let's navigate back into Device Manager. And now when I look at my grid, if I look at my options here in terms of the columns, if I scroll down, usually when you add them, if you scroll all the way down to the bottom, you're going to see them at the bottom. I started moving these around, but we have region and country. So I want to give you one other tip, in that you can take these, and even here you can drag and drop them. So I can drag them up in order. So if I want region and country to be at a different order, I can drag them up, right? Configured by, configured type. So I can reorder the grid right here. And now I'm looking in the grid, and look at, I see region, I see country. Well, let's say I want to customize this even more. I can come in here, I can turn off description, I'm not using that field, and then I can reorganize here as well. So right after host name, I want region, and I want country. So I can drag and drop, and now I see them here. So this is how you add in custom fields, and then you can populate, and then via a click in, I can double click into any one of these, and then remember we specified a drop down. So here's the region and the country, and I can click on the drop down, and I can pre-select ones that I've added. So you can customize it through settings, and then for your users that are populating these either manually or importing them or through API, you can ensure they're configured correctly here. So now I have those set. Okay, so that really covers use case number 4. Let's see, what are we on here? We are on number 5 of custom fields. So you're essentially extending the fields in which we read from the device, and you're adding fields which are essentially a data store for additional variables you want to use. So let's put these variables to use, okay? Let's navigate into the model editor. And I'm going to navigate to the node view. And I'm going to pick on the node CSR152, which is the same node that we were doing SNMP on. And I'm going to go to the node instance map to see what I'm automating on that node. And I'm going to select the CSR, and then over in associations, I'm going to change the policy of what I'm automating to a different policy. So I already have one set up here for an SNMP. I believe this is the one I want to use. Hit save. So now I'm automating SNMP. And when I navigate into the SNMP configuration, this is where, and let me hopefully make sure I am, okay, perfect. So here, you can see in this configuration, Gluware is pointing to variables. So anytime you see in config modeling, anytime you see $context, it's pointing to a variable. Most of these variables are populated from a form fill of your feature itself. So if I double click on the feature and I go into configuration, I get a nice form fill, kind of an abstracted, and I can look at all my variables here. So that's great, and you can store variables that way. But when you want to store variables from the device grid and use custom fields, you can do it that way as well. So, and we can point to the variables from different locations. So now I'm automating SNMP, and for the parameter SNMP server location, I am going to configure the region and the country. So instead of hard coding CLI, I'm going to say, hey, Gluware, use the variable $context.customfields.region and use the $context.customfields.country. So this is telling Gluware to pull the variable from those custom fields, and that's how I leverage them. So now I can just click on this router here. Oop, say no, I didn't change anything, and I can say I want to provision this router, and just for the sake of demonstration, well, I would normally do a preview first, but let's go ahead and provision it. Start action, and hit proceed. So we're going to provision the feature. And when a provisioning is taking place, I can scroll over and I can see it's going to go through. So it does the default iOS router where it's reading all the variables that it reads. Now it's automating SNMP, right? And so I can see it here in the summary. The other thing I can do is navigate into the log. Let me prevent this from overlapping. I double click here and I can see exactly what is happening in the log. And I can even click on the view that is command line only. And if I hit processed, I can see SNMP server location is America and USA. So I can see it properly pulled those variables and I'm good to go. So that's use case number 5. It's using custom fields, layering them into the config modeling, and automating Gluware to use that variable in the configuration. So let's take it one step further and look at, I think actually that was use case 6. We're going to move on to use case 7, which is, let's take a look at drift and audit. Now we want to audit for those parameters, right? So here we are in drift and audit, and I'm going to navigate into audit. I can close out this top window. And I have an audit called SNMP location. So if I double click on that, I come in here, and what I'm auditing is this is where you build, if you haven't looked at audit before, you build rules that are either required or forbidden configuration. And so I have a very simple single rule, which my rule name is SNMP location. I require SNMP server location, and instead of just requiring that kind of statement, I will want to actually audit and ensure that, in this case, the variables are pulled a little bit differently. There's a little bit of a different path from audit to the variables. So we reference them, and the dollar sign, and then the curly brackets here, device.region and device.country. So those custom fields in the device grid are referenced by device.region, that's the region custom field, and the country.custom field. So now I can go to my device list. I can select that. I'm going to select a single router in this case, and I'm going to say run an audit, and audit for my SNMP location, and hit start audit, and then I hit OK, and as I navigate into my details, no violations found. So I can see I successfully passed the auditing for those parameters. So that concludes use case number 7, and you can see the kind of sequence or cadence here of adding custom fields and how you use those in Device Manager is kind of a source of truth and additional information about the devices. Then you can move on and use those variables to configure it in config modeling. Then you can even tie those parameters into your audit to ensure that you are, validating that is the right configuration on your network devices. So that concludes that set of use cases, and we'll move on to the final 3. Okay, so we're getting towards the end here. We're going to get through the last 3. The next use case here is around using the state assessment functionality, which is in config modeling. So I'm going to navigate over to another system here, which is on demo.gluware.com. And config modeling is where we do configuration management, but we can also hook in operational state checks through state assessment. So if you haven't looked at this feature yet, let me show you how you navigate that in. Let me select a node here. I'm going to bring up the node instance map, and you tie in state checks through the policy. You can think of the assembly. The assembly is like a shopping cart. You're telling the Gluware engine everything you're going to automate on a given device or set of devices. And when you look at the shopping cart here, for example, the assembly, we're automating banner and DNS and NTP and so forth. There is a tab you're going to notice at the top here of when you're clicked into the assembly, the yellow box here, called state. Here in the state dialog here, you're going to see really there's 3 different options of inserting a state check. On demand means you can execute it at any time, scheduled or triggered. While performing a provisioning is you can schedule to be before a provisioning or after, or before and after, and compare the results. And you can add an item here to hook it into while performing an OS management and the OS management app for operating system upgrades. So because we're really focused on really just using state assessment and understanding how to work it, we're going to focus on the on-demand ones so we can execute just a state assessment. So let me go ahead and navigate into a particular state assessment. So in the kind of so-called building blocks of Gluware, there are 3 components that make up a state assessment. It's the state assessment policy, and a policy is like another list or a checklist of the things you're going to check. So if I look at this particular one called pre-check CLI state policy, I have a single check here. If I click on the BGP state policy, I have a line item here. And if I look at the NTP item, I have an item here. So each of these are policies with a single verification, but we can augment that and modify it to add another. So let's double click here into the pre-check state policy. What I want to highlight is that the state policy the line items here are made up of 2 primary components, something called the CLI state item and the CLI state query. The state item is the component that runs the command and essentially formats the data. You can think of CLI commands as returning unstructured data, and you're going to use regex and apply structure to it, and you can apply and assign variables to it. Then through the query, you can query those variables. So let me click on this follow button to link into what the ping CLI state item works with. So here at the top, I'm executing a ping and then $ of context.ip address. So this is a variable that we're pulling from the form. And then I'm looking at, I have a category called regex. This is just a label. And I'm going to take the output of the device when I run the ping command, and I'm going to format it using regex. So I'm looking at, and I'm capturing the packet size, I'm capturing the IP address, and so forth. And probably one of the most important ones in this is that there is a success rate line that is outputted, and I'm capturing a variable called the success rate. Okay, so when you send pings, you get anywhere from 0 to 100% successful in executing it. But one power user command or feature I want to show you is if you have rights within your Gluware system to see the Json view, instead of building it out through the form, which is very reasonable, and you can do that, you can learn how this works, it's pretty straightforward. When you look at the Json view, we're in an era of like network infrastructure as code. So the Json view allows you to kind of pull the covers back in Gluware and see the underlying JSON structure. What I want to highlight for you is this is editable, and I had another engineer share with me the ping, state check, and state query. So what I was able to do is take another engineer provided the JSON to me, and you can copy and paste JSON in here. So she sent me the ping CLI state item. I copy and pasted the JSON in here, essentially reusing the JSON she created, and hit save. And so there's my execution of a command and capturing out into regex and assigning the output data into variables. So next, I'm going to go back to the policy, and I'm going to go into the second component of it, is the query. So I navigate into the query here, and again, I can navigate the table, and I can add a line item. And you can read what this one is it's looking at the pattern and the category rate. So this is the walk down of that output I was capturing. And there's a variable we created called success rate. And the value that we're looking to compare it to is 100%. So if I look at the JSON view of it, it is really simple. And again, I was able to create, just come in here and let me lower this here. Create, I just do an add button for a brand new CLI state query, copy in this JSON, and I'm off and running. In fact, let me show you that in real time here. I'll just hit add, and I'm going to call this, I'm going to edit the label here and call this ping 2. Actually, I'll call it ping there, and then instead of 1, I'll say 2, and I'll hit save. And I'm going to go back to this one and view the JSON component of it. Copy the JSON out here. Go into ping 2. I'm just showing you this for demonstration purposes of how this feature can be built. So right now it's an empty feature, and I just Control V. I copy in the variables there. I hit save, and I just created the exact same query. So the purposes was just to show you how it got built. Okay. So what I'm doing here is it's a verification running a check, and I'm comparing the success rate to 100, and if it's 100, it will pass. Back to the CLI state assessment policy. As most people are familiar with what a ping is. You're pinging for an echo request and echo response. So I do have a variable I'm plugging into that ping command, which is 172.16.0.11, and this is my pre-check. Now, remember, I said this is a pre-check CLI state policy, so I can add additional checks here. So I'm going to add an additional check, and you can have a whole laundry list of checks you define. So I'm going to execute a BGP CLI state item. It's basically show BGP neighbor, and say yes. And let me, go back to my, And so it's a BGP CLI state item. And then I click into the query, and I want to execute a query, BGP CLI state query. And if I want to, and I hit save. Whenever you edit these dialogues, you need to save them to make them real. So if I take a quick look at the BGP, it's running a show IP BGP neighbor, and it's looking at each one of the neighbors. And it's going to take the output and capture this information into the variables using regex, including the BGP state equals this variable called BGP state. Okay? And then if I navigate back to the CLI policy and look at the query is looking at the pattern of the BGP state and is expecting the established value. So I'm all good there. So now I have, if I look back at my policy, I have a policy that's called precheck, and I'm executing a ping test, and I'm looking at the output of a BGP command and looking for my neighbors to be established. So I'm good to go there. Now I can return to click on this device, okay, the node view, and then I can say provision. What I want to provision from the drop-down is a state assessment. So I select state assessment, and then I can run my on-demand policy, I can run my provisioning policy, or I can run my OS management policy. I'm going to run the on-demand policy and hit start action and hit proceed. And now that check is running, I'm going to switch over to the log view, and I can see here the activity is running right here. I can double click on it, and in the log view, I can see the green, and the highlights in green there are the outputs of the device, and it's already run. And so again, back from a summary view perspective, I can tell it executed successfully. If I dive into the logs here and just take a quick look at what happened, first of all, every time a provisioning action happens, Gluware executes certain pre-checks. So it is executing pre-checks on the device to ensure it's talking to the right device and looking at show version and some other pre-canned pre-checks. It then is going into the state assessment. So let's take a look here. So in state assessment, it's executing the ping, and I can see the output from the device. It is then executing the show BGP neighbor, show IP BGP neighbor, and we get the output from the device. So here's the interesting part. So it's run the commands, which is great. Now it's executing the parsing and the structuring of the data. So I can see here, based on the regex I defined variables that are called packet size, the IP address, and the success rate. All of that is then put into structured data. Same with the output of the IP BGP neighbors. I can see the structured data here in the log. And then Gluware is going to execute the query on that log. So the first query ID 0, is looking for a ping, making sure the rate is equal to 100, and that is matched and expected, so the query was successful. The second policy, I'm looking at the BGP neighbor relationship and want to make sure it is expected, and that is successful as well. So that is that's really the key things I wanted to highlight to you for the state assessment, and that you are exposing or turning it on through your assembly with the state tab. Then in the state tab, you're determining the insertion point. Then if you come in this window here and you type on the globals, if you type search for state, you're going to see the three components: the state assessment policy, and that's made up of a state item and a state query. And then in your state assessment policy, you can define as many of those individual line items as you like to do for your pre-checks, post-checks, and so forth. So with that, we'll wrap up this use case and move on to the next. Okay, use case number 9 here is really a simple and straightforward one, and it'll probably be the quickest one yet. And we're going to talk about multi-edit from Device Manager and multi-edit from the config modeling. So let's start with Device Manager. And we'll take a good example that ties into the previous example of where we assigned additional region and country fields. So let me take these devices here, and let's just say that when they were created, the America and the USA parameters were not right. Let's just say this whole network is actually located in EMEA. I can highlight these devices, and you are going to see an icon for edit devices. Because I've selected multiple devices, what you see here is the multi-editing dialog, and so you can edit all of the parameters to those devices at once. So again, based on my use case, let's say, and let me click on the fields I want to edit. So I want to change all these from America to EMEA, and I want to change the country from USA to, let's put them in Germany here, and hit save. And that essentially is a multi-edit. You highlight the devices that you want, or you do a multi-select, then you come over and you select the multi-edit button from the actions bar, and you get the multi-edit dialog here. So pretty straightforward, but might be a little hidden or an underused feature that people don't know about. Next, let's navigate into the model editor, and we're going to take another use case that we did before, which is, if you remember, we automated in a previous example, we automated the SNMP policy on the CSR 152. So now we're going to take CSRs 153 through 155, and again I do a shift and I multi-select, so shift and click. Now I've selected 3 devices here, and now in the node view, again I'm clicked on the I'm on the node view here. I click on the multi-edit icon. That's critical. And similarly to the device manager, you're going to see the selectors. And so I want to change the association, because this is where we assign the policy, and I want to assign all of them to the, you can type a search here, SNMP. I want to assign all of them to that same SNMP assembly that I had on CSR 152. I hit save. And now if you look, I've edited my columns in my node view here, and I've added the assembly policy into view. So I can see CSR 152, which we first tested and edited, has SNMP underscore assembly policy, meaning we're automating the SNMP policy. I've taken that same policy and I've copied it or assigned it to 153 through 155. And so that concludes multi-edit, both from Device Manager and within the model editor for config modeling. And we'll move on to the last use case. Okay, so on to the next and final use case. So we're running a little bit late, so I'm going to move kind of quickly here. What we're going to look at is using Gluware to discover information off the device to then use as a variable. So let's change the view here to an iOS switch. A very good example is around a VLAN assignment here. And let's take a look at this 3650 switch, and I'm going to assign it an automation policy around NAC, Network Authentication Control. So let me apply that in here. And so without getting too deep into rehashing config modeling, for those of you who may know it, we're essentially defining, through the assembly is what we're automating, and we're going to be automating the NAC, Network Admission Control configuration, which is the global level at the interface level. And so let's jump into the actual commands we lay down under the interface. So when we look at this configuration, already covered in this session is when we include $context and then a variable, we're pulling that from the feature configuration. Well, you see another interesting variable here where we're reinitializing. We have a command where we're reinitializing to a VLAN, and instead of putting a VLAN number in, we're saying $discover VLAN discover.vlan.access. So the path is based on discovery and it's around VLAN and access. So the way we define that, whenever you're doing a discovery variable in the concept item, the concept item, as a quick refresher, is a preceded part of the library in Gluware. You can create them yourself as well, where we're running show commands to look at the configuration state. Well, when we're running show commands to look at the configuration state, we can also leverage that time to execute commands or look at the command output to then take information and assign it to variables. And so you're going to see a tab called Discovery Elements. So if you look under Discovery Elements, we're discovering numerous information here. The one I want to highlight in on is, remember, it was VLAN and access. So the path is discover.vlan.access. So this is discover, this is VLAN, and then if I go down here, we're applying some logic to the output to determine if this is configured in access mode or trunk mode. When we determine that, we can then determine additional things. So if you have the output called switch port access VLAN, we're going to actually use regex here and then capture the VLAN configured to the variable access. So when Gluware does its pre-check to see how it's configured, we're going to run the command. We're going to be able to capture variables off the device, in this case the VLAN ID. Then we can turn around and use it when we configure. So again, in previous examples, a little bit advanced, but I clicked in on the Json View. The Json View is good when you're thinking about the code structure or how is that variable handled. Well, these are the discover variables. So I discover, then the path is .vlan, and then the path is .access. And so the access variable is being captured out of the switch port access VLAN, and that's how we capture the VLAN, and then we're able to assign it. So if we go to this switch here now and look at a provisioning preview, provisioning utilities, we'll just execute a preview here and start action, executed a connected preview. We'll take a look at what the engine will do, and this is a good way to test and see exactly what gets rendered. And again, I've navigated into the log file here to see everything the Gluware engine is running. And so you'll see it cycle through the normal pre-checks, then it is going to execute discovery to discover the concept items that we're running, and it will assign all those variables, and then it can then use them for provisioning. So when I look at what's going to get configured, and I look on say the processed view, so look at this line here, and again it's cycling through the interfaces, but it's saying VLAN 123, VLAN 123. So that was not hard coded in there. It read it off the switch and then used it for the configuration. So I know that was quick, and there's numerous use cases you could apply to it, but when there's a variable and a parameter that you want to capture off the switch, you can use the discovery component, read it off the switch, assign it to a variable, and then turn around and use that in your configuration. So thank you for your time and interest in Gluware. If you're interested in trying Gluware and you don't have it, there are essentially three options. One is you can go to gluware.com/pricing and request free access. We'll spin up an instance in AWS for you, and you can use it with your own network and your own test lab, however you like to evaluate. Next is an option we call a test drive. Go to gluware.com/test-drive. You request it, within 24 hours we spin you up in a virtual instance. All you do is log in and start executing, and you can run nearly all the use cases I've shown you in this session. The third and final way is you request a demo, gluware.com/request-demo, or you can just hit request demo from one of the icons on our Gluware webpage, and we will figure out what you need and how we can help solve your automation challenges and issues. And you can determine how to proceed from there. A lot of our prospects like to move into a proof of concept to leverage Gluware and ensure it can meet their use cases. So again, thank you for your time and interest in Gluware. You can always contact us at sales@gluware.com or through our website. Thanks, and have a great rest of your day.